Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in just a moment here. We're going to give a minute or two for everybody to join in. We'll start the webinar at 12:02. And for those that are just joining right now, we're waiting for a few more people to join, and then we'll get started in about 1 minute. Okay, it looks like we have everybody. So welcome to our webinar today. Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about electronics product management and some ways we can speed our time to market with new products. And really we're going to be focusing on the systems we use today, the team structure, and more. So if we'll go ahead and move forward. Can we advance the slide, please? Thanks. So my name is Chris Church. I am the co-founder and chief product officer here at Macrofab. My background is I've been building robotics products and SaaS companies for about 20 years, and have been leading product here at Macrofab since 2013. I work with our product development, support, and previous our manufacturing engineering teams.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joey Rodriguez. I'm the VP of Product at Macrofab, and I work very closely with Chris Church on bringing the Macrofab platform to life. My background delves in software as well as some IoT products for industrial applications, and so bring that context to Macrofab.
Thanks, Joey. I'm really glad to have you here. Unfortunately, Warren could not join us today, so we won't have Altium here with us, but hopefully we will be entertaining enough for you guys as well. So today, just a quick run through the agenda. We're going to briefly talk about the impact of product development on the time to market. We're going to talk about the ways you can design a team, how to accelerate the tooling that your team uses, and we're going to really touch on the industry and some of the big changes that are happening out there and how you can take advantage of those. And then we're going to talk about avoiding rework and production delays through that team structure and that tooling. So one of the things that we really see these days is everyone wants to get their products out on time. It's a pretty significant concern. Recently when we're looking at surveys done by the Aberdeen Group, we'll find that at least 35% say their top objective is getting to the product to market on time. Yet when we look at even some of the best performing companies out there, many of them still fail to hit those targets and goals. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. We could list out all the different causes for delays in a product, but the one we really want to focus today is the team and the communication infrastructure and how information flows between those teams.
Chris, I was going to add, if you delve into that report, the 12% lateness, those are the top performing, which is about 20% of the companies in those reports. The other, say 80%, it kind of goes really far down from there with, 25% being late with those middle of the pack, and kind of the bottom laggards sometimes can be late up to 50% of the time. So it's really just a wide distribution of performance in terms of being on time.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, because when we look into company level performance, um, the companies that are top performers, when we kind of look at those surveys as well, are not just top performers in their product development process, they're top performers in the market. So we'll find that those companies which are able to more successfully hit those dates really actually do better in the market. They sell more product, they get it out faster, and they tend to take the lead in their market, not just in the time to deliver. Okay.
Me
All right, we
jump to
can
the
move forward.
slide. Yeah. So thinking about the product development lifecycle, there's some of you may be familiar with these concepts here. It's a little bit of acronym soup, but there's multiple stages as we bring a hardware product to the market. Obviously, it starts in the ideation and prototype phase and kind of culminates into some sort of mass production. But there's a lot of steps in between where you're achieving various milestones in bringing that product to market. And the way to think about this is, on the x-axis, so that just the bottom, this is playing out over time. And, your time to market, you're faster when you compress these activities and can be efficient. But when you inevitably hit snags, your time to market expands. And the thing to think about is, as you reach these milestones, you're also achieving certain technical readiness levels, which is this TRL acronym here. These are well-established norms in the industry. And so, as you progress through those milestones, you achieve more and more technical readiness to the point where you can produce a product at mass scale. And so we want to think about, as we think about team structure and how we communicate and what sorts of tools are we using, we want to use those things to the end that we're able to be more efficient and bring this whole time to market to become faster. And so really need to think about that in each step. There's different strategies that you can use. There's different parties involved that you need to be cognizant of so that communication can be proactive and surface the right information at the right time as we flow through the development cycle. So if you want to jump on to the next slide.
Yeah, and when we think about the actual PCBA management process here, um, it can be very, very difficult. And a lot of times this is really a difficulty of our own creation, because it really, if we think about that chart we just saw, there are a lot of steps in there and there are a lot of people active. And thinking about, how we tend to fail to effectively communicate there, it's really hard to get complete information depending on your team structure. And one of the real challenges that we often see are strongly siloed teams, right? So you have a product team that develops a spec, sends it to a electronics design team that lays out the circuit itself and thinks about the components that are going to be in there. Then they hand that off to a board layout team who thinks about the physical position of those. At some point, maybe even in parallel, a software development, a firmware team is starting to work and work against that spec. But changes are happening. At each point of that process, each team is finding issues, they're wanting to make changes, and the more siloed those teams are, the more independently they work, the more likely there are to be communication gaps. The other thing we really want to kind of point out here is, what is the communication with your external vendors? If we think about a product we're building, we need to deal with field engineers at the component manufacturers, the distributors who are going to sell those materials to us for production. How do we keep all of those parties synchronized? And if we think about the tools we're using in that team structure, if we have a highly siloed team that each have their own tools that exist in their own space, we're going to start having a lot of missed details and preventable mistakes.
So we brought this framework with us to kind of show how to begin to think about, who are the different parties involved when you're progressing through the hardware development lifecycle. And if you're not familiar with these RACI diagrams, it speaks to, within the parties that are involved in the process, who is responsible, who is accountable, who's consulted and who's informed. And I have an interesting story on this. When I was early in my career developing an IoT product for an oil and gas application, I was a systems engineer and in charge of bringing the whole product together. And it was a device that measured movements and 6 degrees of freedom. And we had a firmware team, we had a software team, we had an electronics engineer as well designing the board. And I distinctly remember one of these examples of just having siloed information. Everything worked great on the bench top, and the device was measuring movements correctly. But as we progressed through the different phases, the DVT, the EVT, we found our first article that the device was reading out opposite movements. So you have something that's supposed to measure gravity. Well, it's telling me the inverse. It's supposed to tell me I'm going left, and it's telling me I'm going right. That was a case where we just, the firmware engineer made an assumption and a change without communicating that to the electronic designer, who then asked that the chip be oriented in a different fashion. So little things like that, you think of the implications of that, just the time impact where it took us longer to get to market. It could have been a quality issue had it made its way out to production. So this framework is very helpful for thinking about, who are the other stakeholders? When do I need to consult with them, or maybe it's just need to know information, and where does the buck ultimately stop? You really want to think about these things as you're progressing through the phases and working with your team.
Yeah, and one thing I really want us to think about on the slide here, if we look at the number of parties and at different points in the process where they're either accountable or responsible, and you think of each of these people in these teams having very specific tools, right? A mechanical engineer is going to use one tool, a firmware or software engineer is going to use a different tool, the supply chain team has a different tool. And think about it, each of these steps, they're generating critical information that needs to flow back to the other teams. For example, if that supply chain team says, look, this part you're asking me to buy is a last time buy, I'm not going to be able to buy this for much longer, and we're talking about selling this product for 6 years, that information needs to quickly flow back to the design engineer and the electronics engineer as early as possible in the design phase. So thinking about how that kind of information can be presented and consumed to all the parties here, and how you interlink those systems will be really critical to the success of your product and the speed at which you can bring it to market.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add, Chris, is, there's probably companies of different sizes on this webinar. Not everybody has the luxury of having all these distinct departments and teams. You may be at a place where you're wearing multiple hats. So it's not just something to keep in mind. We're not trying to say you must have a person dedicated to this role. It's just, if you're wearing that hat too, think about that as well, and think about the other hats somebody may be wearing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so let's think about the tooling. Let's talk about that in a minute here, or for a minute. Now, one of the things I'm not really going to do here is tell you, well, you should go use this PLM tool. You should use this ERP system. You should use this supply chain management tool. The reality is every company is going to have their own specific tool chain and the needs that are satisfied there. But we really need to think about, what are the guiding principles when we're selecting those tools, when we're using and we're operating them? How do we think about the requirements for those tools and how they should be set up? So some of the best practices that we're really going to look at here are, how we integrate with those suppliers that we work with. The traditional way is, hey, I'm gonna have my supply chain person call them on the phone, send some spreadsheets over, we're gonna send a bunch of emails, I'm gonna type up some notes, and then maybe I get that information communicated back to who needs to know it. But that isn't really necessary in today's world. Many of the suppliers, and we'll talk about those in a little more detail in a moment, provide APIs. They provide ability for your ERP, your MRP, and your PLM systems to actually integrate with those. And in many cases, like in the case of Altium and Macrofab and Nexstar, all the way down to the design level. So we can in real time bring supply chain information, component risk information, all the way to the PCB designer. So as they're working on that product, they can really start getting feedback and understanding exactly what the likelihood is that they're going to be able to get this particular component. Another key point here is thinking about our project management systems. We traditionally, have a tendency to use things like, sort of standard MS Project, or, I've seen some companies using spreadsheets, et cetera. Really think about a live project management system, one where anyone can come into and it's constantly getting updates. It's interacting with the systems that the different team members use to manage their work. And as an example here, we've got Jira Advanced Roadmaps. Instead of using just the old school offline project, you can use Project 365. That both of these tools support a significant amount of automation that allow you to actually see in real time as people are completing tasks or notes related to the tasks they're doing. So you can really get a real-time view of how your project is going. And the sooner that you can get that information, the sooner you can go back. Could you go back one slide for me, please? Back. Sorry, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty here, but I do see that we have Warren. So while we're working on that, Warren, would you mind introducing yourself? Oh, I can't hear you.
Talking of technical difficulties, I do apologise. My webcam went crazy. Thank you, everybody. I'm Warren Drummond. I'm the Principal Product Manager at Altium. I look after the Nexstar API products and the Nexus Spectra data products. So some of what Chris was talking about, how we integrate directly with suppliers and how we want to integrate with manufacturers such as themselves, all the way through the chain, that's the product suite I'm responsible for.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you could make it, Warren. I was hoping not to have to talk through your data because you know it better than I do. But back to our best practices here. So thinking about a single point of visibility for key project data. This is one of the biggest issues that we've seen in successful product launches or unsuccessful ones. Is as we're going through first article building, how does that information flow from the team that's actually on the floor, on the ground, building that product back to the design team to make changes when necessary? So again, the traditional way is the factory goes off and does its thing, and after a week of first article building, they have a list of issues that need to be addressed. Well, wouldn't it have been great to have seen those right off the bat? And then the challenge then goes a little bit further, right? Once we get into mass production, how do they access the data, the information, and everything that was discovered during that first article process? So really think about how you can collect that data and surface it in a single place so that everybody can see it as you're going through, because it's always going to be necessary at some point. There's always going to be some piece of information that is going to be critical to, the worst case scenario is to avoid a line down or a major quality issue. And the more we can put all that information in one place, link all those tools and systems together, the more we can enable the teams to successfully build that and not have to go back and pause and figure out what's going on. And then the last point really want to make here is about automating reporting to your stakeholders. It's really traditional, right? You might have a weekly or bi-weekly meeting or a monthly meeting. Here's our status, here's where we are. The problem is we don't tend to get off track in one fell swoop, right? It's not typically one big event that breaks everything. It's a lot of little things getting missed. The data starts to show that earlier in the process. So really think about the tools you're choosing. Can you integrate with them with a real-time dashboarding or metric generation system so that all of the key stakeholders can come in and just see the information they need to see really at a high level when they need to see it. Combining these best practices will really help a lot with keeping your projects on track, because they give you the ability to not only respond to issues when they occur, but to be very proactive and identify issues earlier before it's obvious to everyone.
Going back to your point, Chris, your example about just finding out when something's in the production phase or maybe a part's last order or end of life. Today in the market we're seeing with the supply chain crises, some of these companies are having to go back and redesign products just because they're not finding parts, or they just run into an issue that they ultimately can't solve no matter how much money you throw at it. And that's ultimately the worst case outcome, and you know, you're going to compromise your time to market inevitably. That's a case.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I think that's a great point, Joey. You know, that's something we talked about, I think in an earlier webinar, is, you know, if we roll back to 2018, 2019, you know, in typical, you know, year, I might see less than 1% of orders of products that we're manufacturing at volume, because we manufacture for about 1,200 companies here at Macrofab, and you know, we might see 1% of products have to go back for a redesign once they entered mass production, and it's usually because there was some, you know, big customer miss, you know, a feature needed to be added, etc. Now we're seeing 35% of products in production already having to pause production and make a design change because of material unavailability. And having that information earlier in the process, being able to see that as a design engineer, to be able to add more alternatives to that design, or even, you know, more so going back to your product management team and saying, hey, we might need to cut this feature because it relies on a component that we can't guarantee that we can get. And being able to do that earlier rather than just stopping that whole production run will save your company a ton of money. Now, I alluded earlier to, you know, talking about kind of where the industry is going here, and these are conversations we're having every day, both with Warren and his team over at Nexstar, with manufacturers, with distributors, but everything is moving to an interconnected, real-time world of APIs. And so, you know, we find with Nexstar, right, we've got stocking information in real time from a broad source of vendors. We've got availability and pricing via APIs. We've got real-time risk analysis, industry trends. All of that information can come in. When you think of Macrofab, through our APIs, we get instant labor pricing. We take your design as you're working, you can send it through the APIs and get a real view into what it's going to cost to make it. What are the total costs of logistics? Where are there going to be problems acquiring parts? Where are there going to be additional costs? And how does it impact your lead time? But it goes beyond top-level technology companies like Nexstar and Altium and Macrofab, down to the manufacturers themselves. We'll find really like Samtech, for example, is really leading the charge here to provide all of the information about all of their components at a very, very detailed level through real-time APIs. With distributors, we're able to see, you know, you can automate your ordering. You can get access to your custom pricing agreements. You can get instant stocking updates. So the whole industry that is here to support the production of electronics products is moving to an interconnected real-time world. And the PLMs are starting to support that now. The ERPs are starting to support that integration. So really think about how you go out there and you know, start taking advantage of that to accelerate your process, because the data's there. The tools are there. They're ready and waiting for you guys to use them.
And I think it goes even deeper than that. You know, I think we're now starting to see even other third-party organizations like test houses, design reviewer houses, that kind of thing, also wanting to get involved and not having to share all of this data that's traditionally been passed through numbers of individual files, being able to just interact directly with designers, with the product guys, with the procurement guys, all just through the API information exchanges. It's an exciting time.
Yeah. Well, Warren, this looks like we're looking at some data from Nexstar here.
We are indeed. So one of the things that I think, you know, we've been talking about, Chris and Joey, is we've been talking about how much more information now is becoming available for people to make earlier decisions. You know, there are things that you are never going to be able to to prevent, and I think we're in one of those moments right now with the industry. But there are times when actually you can start looking at the data that we are beginning to see collated from the different interactions we have. And in this particular instance, the EDI charts that we give out are representative of the kind of supply issues we're seeing in the market. So, you know, for your main top-level category components, what are the trends we've seen? You know, if you look at this, you'll see when it was dipped, and you'll see them starting to come back, but which components are starting to come back, and we're starting to be able to provide that data. And not just us, there are other people doing it as well. But it means from taking your product from a product management perspective, you have got more insight into where problems are likely to be than you would have had previously. And you know, this is just the first of many kind of, I think, data products that you will begin to become available to people within the electronics industry to help that integration and to that decision-making process become much more straightforward.
Yeah, and I think, you know, even from my perspective, I tend to use this information because I have to deal with customers all the time and talk to them about, you know, what are things looking like, and being able to have that kind of insight and see the trends. You know, I can easily tell everyone all the prices are going up because that's just what's happening across the board. It's not just in electronics, right? Gasoline, everything else. But being able to say, hey, look, looking at that EDI data and saying, hey, you know, while your passives are getting easier to get right now, the trend is moving down on the ICs. So let's talk about how we develop a strategy to focus on those.
And you know, with all of that information, like you mentioned it before, you know, what alternatives are there? You know, what other ways can we solve these problems? What alternates have we got? You know, and that's obviously how we visualize that data. And we're for us in Altium anyway, we're trying to provide this kind of information for all sorts of different people, and that's it. But this is a great example of how easy it is if you want this information without having to visualize it and integrate it into your third-party systems. This is just a simple kind of understanding of the API. What is it I'm looking for? You know, what is it that we've got in terms of data, and then how do I just get that? And this API feed means you aren't updating spreadsheets. You're not going and looking on websites for data. This is just going to be pulled directly into the systems that you have for yourselves and integrate with them. And as you've said, Chris, you know, this is not just for distribution and manufacturer information. You know, we can pass this through. Dare I say, we pass this through with Automate through to Macrofab. You know, so from design through to manufacture, these APIs are able to pass data, and that data can be secure. It can be revisioned, it can be understood. You know, it's safe in a way that I think previously we've really not seen that level of integrity.
Warren,
Yeah.
I was going to point that you know, one awesome thing about this is, you know, you guys are in essence democratizing data that, you know, probably only the companies at the most massive scale in the world of electronics manufacturing, say Apple or Tesla or somebody like that, they might have insight, you know, from their own buying into what these trends are. But you know, an average small, medium-sized mid-market company, you know, they would never have access to understand these sorts of trends at this granular level of detail. So I think it's great what you guys are doing there.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of cloud technologies, and as you see, whatever industries transform, there's a democratization around data, you know, and it's that democratization of technology and data, opening up what was once, you know, very expensive, integrated end-to-end systems that would have been very walled garden specialist, only available to the very biggest companies. That's now changing. You know, small to medium companies can use their design software. They can use the APIs. They can use Macrofab to then get the quotes and get the information without having to have spent the millions upon millions of dollars that, you know, big companies would have had to do in the past.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if we were to add to the democratization of the data access subject, the other thing I'd love to, I think is really important today in today's market for companies of any size is the sense of agility this gives you, right? If you have to call somebody to get a price update or a stocking update, if you have to go through your normal supply chain process to do all of that, you're really behind the curve, right? Because if you have access, if you're using the APIs, if you're using this level of integration and getting real-time information, you can start to see changes in pricing. You can start to see changes in availability, and you can start adjusting your plans before you rely on the data you had a week ago or a month ago, right? The easier you make it to get access to this data, the more it's available to you, the more you can start monitoring it and watching it and really using that to drive your production plans or even your product design plans, as we mentioned earlier, starting to see that that IC you use is, really it's going down in its stock and it's going up in its price over the past couple of weeks could lead to a design change. And that's the level of agility that has, I'll be honest, up until the last couple of years didn't exist in this market, right? It was let's just go make it happen. I designed around this, go find me the parts. And a couple of years ago, that was probably possible. But today, even for the biggest companies, that's not possible.
And I think, as this starts to become more and more commonplace, there's even more transformation that will start to happen. Lots more signals of what people are trying to do, what they're prototyping, what they're looking to try and achieve and go to market with will send better signals to the distributors and to the component manufacturers about what people really need. So, even then it can become more and more exciting about how much more efficient we can become.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the future here. So I always look forward to the future. We all do here. So.
So this is kind of interesting as well. So one of the things that we're beginning to try and help is how do you start looking at your BOM and understand potential risk. So with the data that you see that we highlighted at Eddie, one of the services and some of the services you will start to see, I think not just from us but from other people, is, well, historically it's always been fine, and it's always the way, isn't it? When everything's okay and you've always been able to get your parts, you've never really worried how available they are because you've always managed to get them. But one of the things that we want to try and do and try and open up now is how much risk do you have with your BOM? We can now do part level analysis, looking back historically at pricing and availability and saying, over the last 12 months, 5 months, this part that you've particularly picked has only been 70% procurable. And by that, we look into the market, we look at the supply chain, we look at the amount of parts that people are wanting and saying, you know what, this many parts isn't often available. There may even be cyclical in terms of, we only see them available at this time of year. So if you weren't aware of that previously, because maybe distributors were holding enough stock, now we're beginning to see when these things get restocked, and you can say, right, okay, if I have to have this part, when is the best time to order? Try and get that information again out. Like you said, I think maybe previously only the very biggest companies would have had that relationship with some organizations, but now we can start opening that up and trying to help every company make some insightful decisions to what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about the work you guys are doing here with this, because with Nexstar and Octopart, with years of information about the availability, we talk about the importance for customers and users of this data to identify trends and act on it. But a lot of times it's really hard to distill that trend. If I've got 300-400 parts in my bill of materials, and I got to think about each one of those and go look at the pricing and the availability, it becomes harder and harder to actually manage that. And actually coming in and being able to summarize this data in this way and provide a high-level risk analysis, I think really helps the users out there, the people building products, to focus on those things which are most important and really identify the top priorities and not have to deal with that sea of data.
Yeah. I think there's a long way we're going to go with this, and I think we'll see a lot more of this. And I think this is something you were talking about earlier, Chris, around the dashboards.
Mm-hmm. And this is so we're going to introduce. You see a new little logo here. For those that are unaware, at Macrofab, we've integrated directly with Altium in Altium Designer. It's a product that together we call Altimade. So you can see bi-directional, whether you're in the Macrofab platform or in Altium Designer, we share that information back and forth. So you're able to, as you're designing, get a real-time price update, not just on here's what my bill of materials cost, but here's what it costs to acquire that bill of materials, to ship it to the factory location, et cetera, right? Here's the vendor that's going to be able at that point in time to be able to have that, and really understanding that real price there, the labor, the lead time, and so forth. And likewise in the Macrofab platform and in both platforms, really see the risk and analysis and data about the materials in your design in real time. So we'll see on our bottom left image here, we have the Altium view, which is really showing the risk level of the materials in there, and kind of giving you a high level view of the things you really need to pay attention to and work on your design. And then on the Macrofab side, we're seeing, like, once that's been paid attention to, we can start seeing the availability, the pricing, the price change over time, the overall contribution to our design of each of those components. So really, we get back to that idea of marrying systems together, sharing information in real time. The more you can do that, the more you can give whoever's working at what time. So in this case, we have the PCB designer working in the screen on the bottom left, and we have the purchasing manager working on the screen on the right, right? And they're sharing information in real time as they make design changes. The purchasing manager can see that and start seeing how that's impacting their ability to actually acquire the materials for this product.
And as we think about like the whole going back to the product development life cycle, the decisions you make in the prototyping early stages of that development life cycle cascade down the effect. And you can see it in that graph there where, like, you're manufacturing maybe 1 to 10 units for the early prototype or EVT stages, and then we can actually show you using those APIs and project out when you get to mass production. What does that look like? Maybe a small decision that you make today doesn't really make a material difference in the price or the lead time of a unit, but being able to project that out into the future, that's ultimately what's going to make your company get to market faster and just be more agile and more successful in the market.
Yeah, and I think that even accounts even more now once you're in the market. You alluded to it earlier. If you start to have problems and you're identifying them early, how quickly can you make a revision that's going to be somewhat future-proof for the next spin and the next manufacturing run?
And that's a great point, because there are, like, just thinking about our companies in specific, there's the ability when you're using something like Altium and working with someone like Macrofab for the design engineer to make changes in real time that can be then projected all the way to the manufacturing floor and the supply chain team without having to go through 5, 10, 15 layers of communication to make that happen. And of course, there are workflow controls and all of that to help manage that information. But the ability to respond in real time is what this connectedness gives us. And it's beyond just communicating, hey, I think we should do this, but actually making that change and affecting the production in real time. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here with just the last couple key points to bring it all back together, right? Think about your component lifecycle as early as possible in the design and use real-time information about current and future availability, and use that to drive the product design itself. Use that information, share it with other team members through an interconnectedness, having those systems that each of those teams are using so that everybody's aware of what's going on and what the risks are. Thinking about our assembly efficiency at production scale, getting feedback early, again, whether it's through APIs or design tools or interaction with your manufacturers, getting that as early as possible in the process to drive better design decisions will reduce delays later. Now, thinking about modern and connected digital tools, put your systems together, enable real-time flow of information, collect data, analyze it, and you'll be able to react faster. And then to help facilitate that, the whole market, the whole industry is moving towards APIs and interconnectedness. Utilize those, start taking advantage. If you're using an off-the-shelf, PLM system, ask that vendor, whose APIs can I connect to? Can I connect to Nexstar? Can I connect to Macrofab? Can I connect to, Samtec or Mouser or DigiKey, any of these guys? Can I get that information in real time right here where I'm working? And if they don't have it yet, push them, let them know that you need that. It's not all about you building it, right? But the tools are going to be moving that way. And the faster you tell them that you need it, the faster they're going to be able to implement that. As we wrap up here, Warren or Joey, any final thoughts beyond what we've talked about here?
I just think we're at that time as well where you think about the industry. We took on a lot of technology early on. We've led ECAD and MCAD, and that led the way in, you know, people using digital tools. You know, and it's kind of just topped out and siloed. And I feel there's this kind of natural progression now of the cloud-based tools, the ease of which they're available, the common skill sets that are available to join APIs. You don't need very expensive specialist programmers. You know, it's a common skill set now that I think we'll see this just drive forward more and more as we go forward. The time for transformation is now.
Yeah, and I would just add that you know, coming out of, you know, the craziness of the last 2 years, the world has fundamentally changed. The things we once knew about how this industry works changed, and perhaps it's here to stay, and it's going to change some more. You know, you have people reconsidering the validity of like just-in-time manufacturing or how much inventory to hold. You know, I think we're going to see a reliance on real-time data to drive a lot of these decisions. But ultimately, you know, I wouldn't bank on things going back to whatever we call normal before. I think, you know, the companies that can adapt to this new market and, you know, utilize tools available to us, data available to us, are going to be the ones that succeed, you know, in the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I think you hit on the excellent point there, Joey. Everyone keeps asking, when is the component market going to go back to normal? The real question I think to ask there is more if it's going to go back to normal. You know, every time we think it's going to get better, everybody starts pushing the dates out again. The reality may be this is the go forward motion for the market. Demand is just increasing across the board for products and materials. And so there's going to be a lot more competition over time. I don't think we're going to go back to, you know, 2015, 2016 material availability anytime soon. Okay.
Well, do you want to go? I'm sorry. I was going to say, do you all want to go ahead and open up the floor to questions? If anyone has any questions, awesome. If anyone has any questions, please send them in the chat, and I'll let the panel know your questions, and hopefully we'll get some. Don't see anything quite yet.
No worries. No worries. You know, while we're waiting on that, just to talk a little bit about, you know, Altimade, that is something that Warren's team and our team have been working very hard on this year. And this is really the first step for us, you know, thinking about having those tools come out already, you know, the second you bring them to market, already interconnected with the different systems and the different vendors you need. If you haven't heard about Altimade and you want to get access to it, and what it really is the ability in Altium Designer to not only price a design, but to, with press of a button, go ahead and order it and have it delivered to your door from a prototype standpoint, and then the ability then to easily transition that into your production orders. If you haven't heard about that and you want to know more, or you want to get access to it, just give us a drop us a line at product@macrofab.com, and we'll get you on the list and get you set up for it.
Great product.
It looks like we have a question. Folks want to know about the TV behind you, Warren.
Okay, hold on. It is a 1971 Sony Trinitron, which I just recently recovered out of the attic of my family home because we're selling it, and it was too heavy to carry up to my attic, if I'm honest. So it's been at the back of him, and almost every call I'm on, everyone goes, "What's the TV there for?"
So have you made a circuit design that will enable you to actually broadcast to that thing now that we no longer have the analog signals?
Not quite. It's on the tick list of things to do. I've started to get the parts together that we need. Maybe I'll have to do it in Altium Designer, hit it on Altimade, and get the board pitched out to me.
Dude, that would be great, because then we can have a, you know, kind of a webinar where we walk through, and then the TV turns on. What we did.
So it looks like that might have been it for the questions. Everyone, make sure you check your email later. You'll find a treat. And also make sure you attend our next webinar, which will happen on July 14th. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Warren, for coming and speaking with us. Thanks, Chris and Joey. Anything else from anyone? Doesn't seem like the questions is. No.
I was going to say, if you want to find out more about Altimade, you can also go to macrofab.com/Altimade, and maybe we could send the link out, and you can sign up there.
If you're interested in the Eddy data, if you just go to nexstar.com/Eddy, then you'll be able to get hold of that. It's a free downloadable report, so you'll get it every month. But thank you for having me, and I apologize for my late arrival.
No, totally fine.
We were glad to have you, and thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.